a part of a series that I do that I call Psyche Symbols and Celestial Spheres, and we focus on different topics each time. So we're actually not really going to get into the zodiac at all, or even the planets, really. We'll get into the planets a little bit, but we're really focusing on the houses. And so if you've been to my workshops before, we always kind of start out with the most broadest understanding of astrology and then dive into our particular topic, and then end with going through if you want to ask any questions about your particular birth chart and how it can be interpreted based on everything we've learned. Then we'll save all of the specific questions you have for your birth chart for the end. But no pressure to do that. It can be a lot. There's so much. There's so much. So let's dive in. So my learning objectives for us today, by the end of this, I'm hoping that you will be able to define what a house even is in astrology. I imagine that many of you may not know what that is yet, really. And also be able to contextualize the houses in the greater scheme of astrology and the 4 pillars of astrology. Be able to identify what house your sun is in, and also which house topics are the most challenging and probably the most beneficial or kind of fortunate for you, which will be really fun to talk about. So we'll start out with understanding astrology broadly, and then get into the astronomy behind the astrology, which is how all of our symbolism, where it comes from, is the literal astronomy. And then we'll talk about what a house actually is, what the specific delineations of each of the 12 houses are, and what each of those represent for you in your life, and then how to evaluate the condition of house topics. So it gets like a little bit advanced, but yeah, so it's really more kind of like food for thought at that point, but we'll at least do a few interpretive principles that you can apply, and then we'll use your charts as examples at the end. So I always like to mention at the beginning that, so I practice traditional astrology. This is Hellenistic astrology. This is from like the 1st to 4th century CE. So back in the day, astrology was not as gentle as it is now. Ancient astrologers were quite blunt and kind of black and white about things, which I am, a modern person, and I'm not going to be like, okay, you're definitely a thief and because you have a Mars-Mercury conjunction or something. But just in modern psychological astrology, people kind of tended to start to paint very broadly, like anything can mean anything, and everything has this psychological kind of piece to it, where if you just look at it the right way, then it can be great. But the reality of astrology is that it covers every aspect of life, and we are all probably aware that the human experience is one of multitudes, and there's a lot of suffering that we experience and in the world, and our nature is not only good. And so there will be things that come up that could be pretty challenging, and you might even be surprised by what is reflected. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, like, don't feel pressured to share any of that, but if there ever is something that comes up and you're like, oh, I'm seeing this reflected, and you do want to bring it up, feel free. Just know that everything is contained here, so that can be heavy sometimes. So just tread lightly. Okay, so what is astrology? Does anybody want to give me a definition? I know some of you definitely could, because you've been here a few times, but does anyone want to give it a shot, defining what astrology is? It's too crazy for us to having just met. I'll throw it out there then. So I consider astrology to be both an art and a science. It's a system of symbolic thinking using astronomical bodies and points, so like the literal sky, and our experience, our perspective of it, for symbolism, to understand the human experience and also to make predictions about our nature as individuals, but also what might happen in the future. Which is another thing that ancient astrologers were more into, that modern astrologers kind of let go of, but is now coming back since this revival of ancient astrology. So what can astrology do? Astrology can do so much more than I think people realize. I was shocked to learn all the different applications of it. Most of you are probably familiar with natal astrology, which is what we're going to be looking at today, looking at your birth chart to see what is your character like, who are you? But not only can astrology look at the character and analyze your nature, but also it can tell us about your future. You can look at medical astrology, which can kind of give you a sense of health and projecting out the future of your health and like optimal times for surgeries and things. There's economic astrology where people make predictions in the stock market. There's also horary astrology, which is like a form of divination, kind of similar to tarot, where you would ask an astrologer a question and the birth chart of that moment becomes the answer to the question. There's also electional astrology, where you use astrology to select auspicious dates for things. Like if you were getting married or starting a business, you could choose a date that would be fortunate for that. There's mundane astrology, looking at the astrology of the world and countries and geopolitics and things like that. There's astrological magic, where people will use astrology to create like tinctures or kind of capture certain astrological energies in stones and things, and or like things that you can wear or smell and things like that. So it's kind of astrological magic. There's fertility astrology, like making predictions about the best time to conceive or like how fertility could go for you. You could look at career, synastry, relationships. Rectification is trying to figure out, like, if you did not know your birth time, there's astrologers who specialize in figuring out what your birth time most likely was based on using events from your life and kind of doing different analyses like that. You can do astrocartography, figuring out what is the best place for you to live based on certain things. Like, you know, if you want to really have a great career or find the love of your life or make the most money, there's astrologers who focus on that. So I just wanted to give you guys a broad idea about the kind of the scope of astrology. And this is why it would take many lifetimes to understand everything there is to know, because there's just so many applications and they continue to evolve. Okay, so then for the kind of philosophical assumptions, like if you practice astrology or if you believe in astrology, these are some of the things that you're sort of required to believe about the nature of the universe. One is that the basic definition of astrology is that there's a correlation between celestial movements and earthly events. So there's some connection between the movements of the planets and what happens here on Earth. That's kind of the most basic definition that every astrologer would agree on for astrology. Also, astronomical bodies and points carry archetypal significance, and I'll get into what I mean by that and what an archetype is in a slide or two. Also, the visual appearance of astronomical movements from our subjective experience has symbolic meaning. So this is really important because a lot of people who are skeptics kind of get caught up on this point where it's like, why do you think a conjunction means anything when two planets come together? Because it's like they're not literally coming together. It just looks like that from our point of view. And it's like, yes, that is actually the whole point, is that it is from our point of view what matters. So the sun does not actually rise and set. We are rotating around the sun, but that is not the point. The fact that it looks like the sun rises and sunlight appears around us has an effect on us, and it is our subjective experience of what's happening that matters. And this is something that I think with the scientific revolution, people kind of like took too far, where, you know, maybe prior to that, our subjective experience was overly prioritized, and it was like, oh my God, I see this and it's real. And it's like, not everything that is happening inside of your head is actually real, or that you see really matters, because there is a greater objective picture. But also, your subjective experience is the only experience that you'll ever have, and it matters a lot. And so the way things look to us does actually have an effect, and that's kind of what astrology is doing. It's not like an objective astronomy where we're like trying to be God and looking at the universe like we're outside of it. It's looking at the astronomy from where we are and how it appears to us. And then we've got that time has a quality. So essentially, what astrology does is predict what the quality of a moment feels like. And the kind of felt quality of that moment of time becomes imprinted onto whatever comes into existence in that moment. So I'll get into this more later, but you can think of astrology kind of like a theater in the sky. Like there's this story that's unfolding, and just like a scene in a movie, if you were to pause in the middle of a movie somewhere, there's a moment that's happening and there's a feeling behind it. Maybe that's a sweet, tender moment. Maybe it's a violent moment. Like there's something that's happening, and that energy, when something is born in that moment, whether it's a business or a person or what have you, becomes kind of imprinted onto them and becomes sort of the story of who they are and their life to some degree. That's kind of the way astrology works. And this last point is basically just a reiteration of that. How is all of this sounding? Does it make sense? Am I crazy? No. Okay, cool. This is astrology as I understand it. Okay, so archetypal thinking, and what is an archetype? So I think most people come into this idea of archetypes through literature, and maybe you've heard of, like the hero and the villain, and these are kind of literary archetypes. So in astrology, we think of the planets and the zodiac signs as like archetypes. And because I'm interested in ancient astrology, I really like to dive into kind of the evolution of archetypal thinking. And this is significant because this is, if you do tarot or anything like that, you're probably familiar with like symbolic thinking and how certain things can have multiple meanings. That's kind of what is at the root of all this. But in the most ancient sense that we can see and understand, I would say that the original version of archetypal thinking is seeing things as gods, for instance. So like in ancient in ancient Greece, they projected their gods onto the planets. So we have Mars as the god of war, and we have Venus as Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love. We have Saturn as Kronos and Jupiter as Zeus. And so these gods are kind of like they carry an essence, right? Like when you are the god of war, there's a god is not a literal person and doesn't have a human experience, but it's sort of like the essence of something, and that's what an archetype is. And from the version, and as old as we can see people practicing astrology, this is kind of the most original sense. It's people projecting the planets as being gods and the constellations as gods and characters in the sky to some degree. And then Plato took this and kind of evolved it into this realm of forms or ideals, which is just making it a little bit more abstract. So instead of like a anthropomorphized god, we have this kind of essence. There's like some ideal form of like love, for instance, that exists, and it's not something that you can find on earth, but it's in this realm of form where there's this abstracted version of like what a perfect love is, and we all have these kind of earthly embodied experiences of whatever that is. And then in modern times, Carl Jung kind of took this forward in psychological thinking, and he came up with archetypal psychology and was actually really into astrology and studied astrology quite a bit. Is anyone familiar with Carl Jung here and Jungian psychology? Some of you, cool. So modern astrology, a lot of modern astrologers are Jungian or like Jungian astrologers. And so Jung had this idea that there's this thing called the collective unconscious, and that there's this unconscious realm where these archetypes exist, and they come to us in dream symbols. And he considered these to be psychological instincts, almost like imprinted into us in the same way that we have the instinct to eat and procreate. We also have instincts to love and fight and seek transcendent experiences and things like that. And so he kind of took this archetypal thinking into the psychological realm, where it's like something that's a part of human nature in our unconscious. So when we look at planets and what planets mean, we can interpret them as psychological instincts. So we can look at Venus, for instance, and say this is your instinct to love and relate. Or we can look at Venus as your relationships, or Venus can also represent your lover, for instance. And we can also just look at Venus and Venus transits or something when you have Venus on top of something in your natal chart as a positive, beautiful, lovely, harmonious experience. And so that's kind of what the archetypal thinking means, is just that there's many different ways to interpret these things in a sense. Is this making sense? This is all very abstract and philosophical, but hopefully you get the gist. You know, just squint your eyes and whatever lands is the way it's meant to be understood by you. Okay, so yeah, this is what I was basically just saying, that archetypal symbols can be, you can think of them as like parts of yourself. Like, is anyone familiar with internal family systems? So that's like a system of therapy where you look at like parts of yourself. And that also was derived from Jung's work, although the guy who came up with it didn't credit him for that. But you can think of the planets as kind of like parts of your psyche. You can also think of them as representing external experiences. Sometimes they will represent things that happen outside of you. And sometimes they represent people in your life. For instance, the moon can represent your literal mother, but it can also represent your instinct to nurture. And then, yeah, that's basically just the point that I'm making with there's many different layers to these things. So don't get stuck thinking that there's only one way to interpret something. There's always layers. Okay, so my philosophy about astrology, because every astrologer has their own kind of unique understanding, and if you keep getting into it, then you'll eventually have your own way of understanding things. I believe that you are your own best medicine, and that the way that you interpret your own birth chart and the story that you tell with it is where all of the power is. Like, I can tell you what some things are that this might mean for you, but for you to understand, okay, this is what Mars is, and for you to really sit with and integrate and learn and kind of internalize the energy of Mars and then interpret it in your own birth chart, and the meaning that you make out of it is where all of your power lies. And astrology is kind of just a narrative tool. It's a tool for creating a story of your life, and you can tell many different stories with it. And I think that that's where the really transformational potential is, for you to be able to tell the story of your life in the way that you would like to tell it. Not that you can just make it into anything. Like, there is something, I believe, that's you here that can't be literally anything, but there's many different versions of it. Like, some astrologers talk about kind of like higher vibrational like energies that you can bring to things, you know? Like, there's a version of Aries that can be aggressive and impatient, and there's a version of Aries that is brave and bold and heroic, you know? There's different versions. Like, any archetypal symbol can have different experiences depending on how kind of evolved or the context that they're in. So that is my philosophy there. And it's kind of like when you look at the birth chart as a symbol and you start to see yourself in it, and you're like, whoa, that gives you this separation, this level of self-awareness to be like, oh, these are the patterns, this is who I am, this is what's happening. And that reflection, that ability to create space and then kind of reflect on the patterns of our own lives and psychology gives us the freedom to kind of tell different stories with it. That's what I think we're doing with astrology, for natal astrology. Anyway, but at the same time, there will be things in your astrology where it's like, this is just a bad thing that happened to you, and that's not your fault. Like, sometimes bad things happen, and there are astrologers who will be like, you know, if you are in the highest evolution of yourself, then bad things won't happen to you or something, and I don't think that's true. I think that there are things outside of our control, and sometimes astrology will reflect things that you couldn't have changed, you know? So that's my 2 cents on how it works. Okay, so now getting into the literal birth chart and what it is. This right here is the birth chart of our workshop. So a birth chart is just a snapshot in time of the moment that you were born. Did everyone know that? Did anyone not know what a birth chart was? That's okay, either way. Cool. And so I thought it would be helpful for me to just kind of go through what each piece of this is. So just to give you kind of the definitions of what we're looking at, and then I'll get into what they mean and how to interpret them. Can I steal your birth chart for an instance? So for example, for her chart, we have the outer wheel here. This is the Zodiac. And maybe this is a good time for me to show you all the stuff that you have here. So one of your papers in here is a zodiac wheel. So as we're going through things, if you're like, what is this symbol in my birth chart? This zodiac wheel here has each of the planets. This is the planetary ruler of each of the zodiac signs, and then also its name under it, so you can translate what all of the planets are. And in the outer wheel, we have the zodiac. So if you wanted to be able to translate which zodiac sign is this for me, then you can go to your wheel and try to find that symbol and translate it there like that. And then on the inner wheel here, these numbers that go from 1 to 12, those are the houses. That's what we're going to focus on mostly today. And then we have these red and blue lines on the inside. Those are the aspects, which just represent significant angular distances between the planets. So as we're doing this, if you want to kind of break down what each of these symbols mean for you, you can go through and look at that. Also, in this piece of paper here, underneath the zodiac wheel and on the back, I have a list of all of the planets and kind of the basics of what they mean. And next to each planet is the symbol. So again, if you're looking for what is this symbol, some of the symbols are next to the planets here. And I'm purposefully giving you your birth charts like this because my goal for you guys is to be able to look at this and understand it, which is like gonna take a long time, but I think it's good to start practicing looking at the whole of the symbol, because a lot of us will use astrology apps where they'll tell you, here's each planet and here's each sign and here's a list of what it means, where you can read and it's all translated in English for you. But that literally uses a different part of your brain. Like when you're reading and looking at things broken down, that's your left brain like analyzing the details and like it's already laid out. When you're looking at the whole of the symbol and you see the lines and the relationships and the way things are grouped and how they relate to each other, that's your right brain. Then you're looking at the whole of the symbol and kind of like more broadly and abstractly, and it gets into kind of deeper layers. Your visual experience is more intuitive and less linear. So I think it's very valuable to look at and relate to the symbol as a whole. So that's my goal for you guys. So as we go through stuff, if you want to start writing down the names of the planets next to the symbols in your birth chart, you're welcome to. That could be useful. So yeah, those are the different pieces of the birth chart and what it is. So we have here a representation of each of the angles. I always start with the angles because I think it's really helpful to just frame the birth chart. So the ascendant over here is the eastern horizon. You've heard of your rising sign probably. Your rising sign is the zodiac sign where the ascendant is located. And again, the ascendant is just literally from our perspective. I'm actually don't know right now. Does anyone know which way east is from this room? We got two different directions being pointed. let's say east is that way. So then if we were to look at the constellation in that direction, that would be the rising sign for this moment. If we project out onto the eastern horizon. And then the descendant is the western horizon. So those are the two things that kind of just give us the eastern and western horizon. And then the other axis is the MC and the IC. And the MC is the point. It's not actually the point directly overhead, but that's what I usually say for simplicity's sake. Technically, the MC is actually the peak of the planetary trajectory. So it's like the highest point that the sun will reach in the sky, for instance. It's the highest point that the planets get to in their what looks like as they rise and set over the horizon. Technically the zenith is what would be perpendicular to where we are directly overhead. So essentially the MC is the highest peak that a planet will get to at any point in a day, and then the IC is directly opposite that on the other side of the planet. So the IC is like the most hidden, most private, most distant from what is visible, and then the MC is the highest, most prominently visible point in the chart. And these are called the four angles. Is all of this making sense so far? So then Well, maybe I'll just have you now then. Can you find in your birth chart the MC, the IC, and the ascendant and the descendant? Find it now and tell me what zodiac sign is, and we'll practice reading your birth chart. So you'll find the ascendant and the descendant, then look at what zodiac sign is there, and if you don't have the symbols memorized, go to your zodiac wheel and figure out which signs they are. And you can write them down in your birth chart if you want, or not if you don't feel like it. And if you need help, ask me, and I'll come. Okay, cool.
Maybe you're having
Everyone got it? You need help? Yeah. Yeah. So like I look at it is in one or the other, and it says this is 29 degrees Aquarius. Yeah.
Oh, 29 degrees Aquarius. Oh, wow.
Yeah, the 29 is like when it's at the end there.
Okay. Thank you.
All good. It could be like 0, like it could be exactly on it, but it's always one or the other. But it is significant when things are on the cusp as well. Okay, did anybody not figure it out? Cool. So then I practice whole sign houses, and I'll get into the different types of house systems briefly, but this is houses are something that astrologers fight over the most. So for whole sign houses, the way that it works, and all of your charts are printed out in whole sign houses, is we take the zodiac sign that the ascendant is in, and that entire zodiac sign becomes the first house. And then the next zodiac sign becomes the second house. And the next zodiac sign is the third house. And each zodiac sign, the entire sign, is one house. And so for whole sign houses, the first house, again, always has the ascendant in it. And the 7th house will always have the descendant in it. And later I'll get into examples of different house systems that don't do that. So, okay, you already found all that. So that's good. Boom. Up. Whoops. Oh yeah. And so this next image is just again illustrating. You can see all the numbers, the way they just go around. One zodiac sign is one house in each of your charts. Is that all good? Is this confusing yet? Okay, cool. Okay, so now we get into some more confusing astronomy. So why we need the time and place to draw the birth chart. Well, actually, this is not as confusing yet. So the ascendant changes about every 2 hours. The ascendant changes with the rotation of the Earth. So the Earth does a full rotation in 24 hours. That's the cycle of day and night. There are 12 zodiac signs. 12 divided by 2, no, 24 divided by 12 is 2. So each zodiac sign changes, or the rising sign changes about every 2 hours. And like I said, because the rising sign is the eastern horizon, that will change depending on where you're born. The eastern horizon is different in Australia than it is here. So that's why we need the time and the place. And it is particularly important for the houses as well, because the ascendant, the rising sign, also defines the rest of the houses. So if you don't know your birth time, then you don't know the rising sign, but you also don't know any of your houses, which is super interesting stuff. So that's why we needed it for today. And this is a little bit confusing now, because the rotation of the Earth and the changing of the rising sign and the houses is different from the movement of the planets around their orbit. So we have the rotation of the Earth changing the rising sign, and we have the orbit of the planets around the sun, and that's how they through the different zodiac signs. In ancient times, they didn't know that the sun was the center of the solar system. They considered the sun and the moon to be planets. They didn't even really know that the planets were planets. From their perspective, they just noticed, all of the stars seem to be in pretty much the same place relative to each other, like everything is rising and setting with the rotation of the Earth day after day. But there's a couple of stars in here that move around. Like the constellations stay in the same configuration, right? They're always the same distance relative to each other. But the planets, they move around through the constellations. And so the etymology for the word planet in Greek is actually wandering star. So in astrology, some people talk about the fixed stars, which is like the constellations are a part of the realm of the fixed stars, but there's also other fixed stars that are notable that people have studied outside of the constellations. And then there's the planets, which are the wandering stars. Is this all sounding good so far? Okay, cool. Cool. And then, okay, so I already had you locate. Did you also find your first and seventh house? You guys see your houses, right? You know where those are. Okay, cool. We got that. So you can see where your first house, your seventh house are, and later we'll get into the 10th and things like that. Okay, and I already talked about that. The zodiac, briefly, since that's not really our main thing. So we're using whole sign houses, and so the zodiac is, I don't want to say a lie, but it's not the way the zodiac is in your birth chart is not in alignment with where the constellations are right now. So originally, like at the time of Hellenistic astrology, and even before that actually, where the constellations were in the sky matched the way that we use them now in the tropical zodiac. But there's this thing called the precession of the
equinoxes.
So the Earth's axis wobbles a little bit. So over, I think it's like, how long does it take? 26,000 years. The zodiac signs, or the entire zodiac will have revolved. So it's only been like 2,000 years since this was originated. So at this point, the zodiac has moved like one full zodiac sign over. And so if you are an Indian astrologer or a Vedic astrologer, then you use the sidereal zodiac. And the sidereal zodiac is actually where the constellations are right now. And so they are more connected to that. But there's even a third zodiac, because even, so you can see the zodiac, we basically divide the sky into 12 equal slices, but that's also not really the case. Virgo is very big. It takes up more than 30 degrees. Cancer is very small. It takes up less than 30 degrees. So this is basically a mathematical approximation. So I use the tropical zodiac as a traditional Western astrologer because I think it makes more sense being in alignment with the seasons. So now, rather than Aries being at the direction of the constellation Aries, which it's off by about one zodiac sign now, Aries is the time, or is the slice of the sky that the sun moves through during the first trimester of spring, right? And Leo's the middle of summer, Cancer is the beginning of summer, Capricorn's the beginning of winter. So each of the zodiac signs is aligned with the equinoxes and the solstices rather than the literal constellations. And I think it's important to tell you guys that, because this is another thing astrology skeptics will talk to you about and be like, the zodiac isn't even real. And then you can say that astrologers have actually known this for thousands of years. We have like ancient dialogues of astrologers talking about the precession of the equinox. So like, we know. And this is a choice that we're making on purpose because we believe that it makes sense to have the zodiac aligned with the solstices and equinoxes rather than the constellations, which I think makes sense because I think the sun and its cycle has a much greater impact on us than the fixed stars. Like, we're much more affected by sunlight and the seasons. And also, part of the core foundational philosophical assumption of astrology is that when something is created, that is significant. So we look at your birth chart, even though that's not the chart right now, because that's the chart when you were born. So we can think about the zodiac and when the zodiac was born, and that still being significant. So I just think on many levels, the tropical zodiac makes sense and is relevant. So that's my little shtick there. Wanted you guys to be able to defend astrology in case it ever comes up for you. Okay, so the 4 pillars. We have the zodiac, one pillar, the houses, the planets, and the aspects, which I already kind of pointed out to you in your birth chart. So in ancient astrology, I find this to be the most coherent and easily understandable way to conceptualize this framework. So ancient astrologers understood the sky to be like its own world. So the sky is kind of like the realm of the gods, right? Like I was saying, these planets can be imagined as gods. And so in this sky world, there are kingdoms. And the 12 kingdoms of the sky world are like the zodiac. So the zodiac is kind of like the countries or the regions or the kingdoms that exist in the sky world. It's kind of like a landscape. So each zodiac sign has its own culture, its way of life. And so when a planet, and a planet again is like a character or a god in the sky world. So the planets, they wander around. You can think of them as the kings and queens of the different zodiac signs. And if they find themselves in a particular zodiac sign, then they kind of take on the culture from that region. They still have their own intrinsic character, like I am still the god of war, let's say, if I'm Mars moving around the sky. But if I find myself in Libra, the sign of the diplomat and the peacemaker, then I'm going to have a different energy because now I'm kind of, you can imagine that I'm grown up in this very diplomatic, peace-valuing region. And so that's kind of how we can start to interpret what different planetary placements mean. So the zodiac is the kingdoms, the landscape, the planets are the characters, they move around, and then the aspects are like the relationships between the characters. So how are they getting along? Do they have a relationship at all? Is it a good relationship or a bad relationship? Are they fighting? So we can look at these lines, and the red lines indicate more difficult or challenging aspects, and then the blue lines represent more positive, harmonious relationships. And in ancient astrology, they do talk about things in terms of good and bad and easy and hard, but in modern psychological astrology, they could say that like any of it could be constructive, but that's kind of the way that they conceptualized it, and that's what I practice. And then the houses, what we're going to get into today, these represent different areas of your life. So in this metaphor, I think of the houses as like the industries or something. So each country has kind of like an industry that it's responsible for. So for instance, if the second house in astrology is related to your personal finances and money. And so the zodiac sign there is kind of like how you relate to money, and the planets there can tell us about, the fortune of your finances, for instance. And also it's like this is the part of the chart that's responsible for that piece of your life. And then the 10th house is career, and the 4th house is parents, and things like that. Is this kind of making sense? I know it's all a little abstract. Okay, cool. And we will get into examples, which will be your personal lives if you feel like sharing. So yeah, that's kind of the metaphor, the symbolism, the mythology behind astrology. And so your birth chart, again, is like a snapshot of a movie or something. So the stars are always moving. There's always this theater that's taking place where there's different relationships forming and severing and fights happening and getting resolved. And so the moment of your birth is like the snapshot, the freeze frame of that story that becomes kind of your character. And then we can also use lots of different fun and fancy tools to project out what might happen to you in the future based on your birth chart. That's the situation. Okay, so now it's time to get into the houses. All right, so I do have some different examples of different houses. These are just some of the popular ones: Placidus, equal houses, Porphyry, whole sign. But there's also Coche, Regimontanus, Campanus, Meridian, Axial. I don't even know what many of these are, but there's like a bunch of different types of house systems. And some astrologers, especially I find like the older astrologers, like astrologers from like the 70s and 80s, love to like fight about this. But my perspective is that they all mean something. Like if you're an astrologer who uses Placidus, I'm not going to be like, you're using the wrong birth chart, none of this is real. Like I wouldn't say that to you. I think that they have different uses, and many astrologers actually use multiple house systems for different reasons. But from my perspective, whole sign I have found to make the most sense for me, and I like to use a lot of ancient timing techniques that require the whole sign framework, so that's what I use. But for instance, so the way Placidus works, I don't know if you guys can see very well, but basically these houses are not the same size exactly. Like you can see how 4 is kind of bigger and 1 is kind of smaller. So this is our the birth chart of our workshop again. So the Placidus, what it does is every 2 hours that marks a new house, starting with the ascendant. So the ascendant is the cusp of the first house, and then after 2 hours you make a little tick, and that begins the second house. Wait 2 more hours, make a tick, that's the third house, on and on. And then once you get to the 6th house, then you just kind of project the lines across the chart. So that's the way Placidus works. And then over here, which one is this one? You do equal houses. Okay, so equal houses is similar to whole sign. So instead of the first house being in alignment with Cancer, so that's what whole sign would do. Equal houses just makes each house 30 degrees. They're all exactly equal size, 30 degrees, but it starts with the ascendant. So starting the ascendant marks the cusp of the first house. You go 30 degrees, and then you get the second, and then the third, and that's the way equal houses work. That's also a pretty old house system. Oh yeah, I think I put the ages here as well. So whole sign is like, oh no, this is Placidus is the newest one, 400 years old. Equal houses, 2100 years old. And then we got over here Porphyry, which is 1800 years old. So the way that Porphyry works is instead, it has to do with the ascendant and the descendant, the IC and the MC, and you just take the 4 quadrants. The quadrants are the 4 slices you get from the MC, IC, ascendant and descendant, and then you divide those by 3. So in this one you can see the space between the MC and the ascendant. These are bigger because there's more space here, but it's just dividing the space equally, and then these are smaller, just divides it by 3. That's the way that house system works. And then what is this one? Whole sign. Yeah, that's what we're doing, which you already know about. And I'm not really going to break it down much further than that. I just wanted you to know, if you've ever gone to the internet and had your birth chart drawn, it probably uses Placidus. That tends to be the most popular one, although now it started, I think, in like the early 2000s. It might have been the 80s, somewhere between the 80s and the early 2000s, there was this traditional revival that happened where these very, very ancient texts were resurfaced and translated into English for the first time in like, I don't know, like 500, 700 years or something. And so now we've had like a lot of people excited, such as myself, about these ancient timing techniques. I'm like, oh my God, look at how cool. They were doing all this cool stuff. Why aren't we doing cool stuff? So now we're doing cool stuff again. Before that happened, people were basically using Placidus because that was like the newest, you know, it's like all the rage or whatever. So now though, there's more enthusiasm for whole sign. So you might see whole sign in the internet broadly, but I'm guessing if you just go to any random like default setting for a birth chart calculator, it'll probably give you Placidus. So if you wanted to draw your chart up again in the way that I have it, you just have to select whole sign under the houses. Usually it'll give you an option of different house systems. So this is kind of getting into the weeds, but is anyone interested in this? Is this like, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
Very interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just different ways to divide up the sky, essentially. But another reason that whole sign makes sense and works for me is from an ancient perspective. Yeah, I should have dived more into this before. So we have the 12 kingdoms, right? Each of the traditional planets is king or queen of one of these kingdoms. So the Sun rules Leo, Venus rules Libra, Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. So each of the signs has a ruler, which may or may not be located in that sign in your birth chart. Chances are it's probably not. There's like a 1 in 12 or 2 in 12 chance that it is. And so we look at the ruler of the house, which is just, if you use whole sign houses, the ruler of the house is the same as the ruler of the zodiac sign, because the house and the zodiac sign are just one. And the condition of the ruler of the house tells us how that part of your life will probably go. And so that's another great benefit of using whole sign houses. We can look at, so let's say in our metaphor, the second house is like the industry of like finance. That's like your personal banking industry in the sky world. And so then we look at, where's the king of finance? Is he under attack? Is he in a place that he hates to be? Or is he like in his home sign, powerful and supported by the planet of luck and abundance? So we can kind of analyze how these different things work out for you. And that's how we interpret different house topics. Okay, so now we're going to get into what each house actually means. And I was just saying here that you could hold any specific questions about your birth chart again until the end, but definitely feel free to ask any like general questions anytime. And as we go through each house, I think it would be good for you to write down what the planets are there. And so I have this worksheet that I made for you guys. And so this, I'm gonna go through what each house means, but in this worksheet, I also have written out, here's basically what the first house means, and here's what the second house means. And so what I want you guys to do is, as we go through each house, write down for you what zodiac sign is this house. And then write down if you have any planets or angles there. For instance, if you have the North Node or Jupiter or whatever.
What does it mean if you don't have any planets within a house?
Oh, that's even on this side. I gotta talk about that. I'm glad you asked that. Everyone always wants to know what an empty house means. So an empty house is neither good nor bad. So sometimes if you have an empty house, I find a lot of times these are just parts of your life that just aren't as important to you, or you don't really think about as much. So you can think of the planets again, right, as like parts of your psyche or pieces of who you are, your psychological instincts. So when you have a lot of planets in a certain house, that gives a lot of energy to that area of your life. So if you don't have any planets in a house, it's probably something that maybe you just haven't like thought about as much, maybe isn't like as big a deal to you. But sometimes empty houses can be more fortunate in a way, because it's like, oh, like for instance, if your 12th house is empty, this is the place of, it's called the place of bad spirits in traditional astrology. So if you don't have anything there, like that could be kind of nice. Maybe you don't, have fewer mental health issues or something. Or it could be if you don't have something there, sometimes it can make things harder in a way as well, if it's like, I kind of wish I had more energy for this thing. So there's not like one way to interpret an empty house, but if every house is significant, like everyone has all 12 houses, everyone has money, everyone has parents, like all of these things exist for everyone, whether or not that house is empty or not. And so if you want to know, or if you have questions about that part of your life, what you do is you look at the ruler of the house and you see, how is that house ruler doing? And that will tell us about the condition of those topics for you. Does that answer your question?
So in the first house, is that where everybody's sun sign is?
No.
Oh,
That's
okay.
because you were born at sunrise, right on the eastern horizon there.
Okay.
Yeah. So everyone's ascendant will be in the first house, and everyone's descendant will be in the 7th house. But other than that, anything could happen. And I guess maybe one other important thing to point out about the houses. So if you use one of those quadrant house systems that divides things up with the MC and the IC, the ascendant and the descendant, then the MC will always begin the 10th house. And so the MC represents career and vocation, and the 10th house also represents career and vocation. So some people like quadrant houses because the MC is always in the 10th house. That's where you define it. The 10th house starts at the MC. But for whole sign houses, which is what we're using, the MC could be in any of the houses in the top half of the chart technically. Like if you were born by the North Pole, you could even have it in the 12th house, for instance. But most of us will probably have the MC in either the 10th, 11th, or 9th house. And so in your little paper here, I did make some notes explaining what it could mean if you have under the MC and the IC piece. If you have the MC in the 11th or the 9th house, I do have some notes about what that could mean. And I'll dive into that too as we go through each house here, house by house. So I'm gonna try to kind of blast through this because it's already 3:30 and I want to make sure we have time to go through everyone's charts if you want to talk about it. And I think it's easier to learn when we're using examples to be like, okay, this is how this plays out in real life in someone's chart. So here we go. The first house basically has to do with who you are. This is the mind, body, and soul. The first house is technically the only house that actually really has to do with you. Every other house is about other people, other parts of life. Like the first house is really your body, your mind, your soul. And the ascendant, which is located in the first house, from a traditional standpoint, this is the most important, important of the big three. The sun is kind of like your ego, your persona, qualities inherited from the father. The moon is like the subconscious, the literal mother, and qualities inherited from the mother, the kind of how you are in private settings. And so the rising sign, though, is really the totality of who you are. Like, you don't really want to be overly identified with the ego or the unconscious. The rising sign is really like the you of yous. The ego and the unconscious and the emotions, these are all very important. We definitely want to like have healthy egos and like strong unconsciouses, but the rising sign is really you. And so if you have planets here, these will be archetypes that you embody very strongly. Like if you had Venus on your ascendant, that's the goddess of love and romance and art and beauty. And so like you are Aphrodite if you have Venus on your ascendant. That's like the way that you interpret that. And you might be particularly beautiful, or beauty might be important to you, or you might be an artist, or you might particularly identify with your relationships. Venus can also identify or mean or represent relationships. So that is the first house. The second house, and you guys can all write down the zodiac sign and the planets if you have them as we do this. The second house is personal finances. This is your money, like I was saying. And some people will also talk about the second house as values, like abstractly, like the things that you find value in or like your core values. I personally don't tend to use that as much. I tend to be more literal, having to do with money. I will sometimes put food in the second house. The way the houses work too is each one kind of builds off of the next. So like when you're born, the moment of your birth, that's the rising sign. And the next immediate thing you need is kind of like food. And also like money is kind of a stand-in for things that you need to survive basically, right? Money is what you use to get what you need. So I sometimes will include food there, but not all astrologers do that. Yeah, and then like possessions, I guess, or like assets, but really it's money, I think. So then the third house, I'm not going to talk about the shows yet. The third house is called the house of the goddess in traditional astrology. I love the third house. The third house in traditional astrology was associated with divination, and also communication. We sometimes, things like publishing can go here in modern times. Also like lower education, like elementary school, middle school, high school, whereas like all of the axes have meanings, right? So the first house is like self, who you are, and then the seventh house is like marriage, opposite. So this is like self and this is like other, the rising and the setting. So the seventh house has to do with marriage, partnership. Maybe I'll go in the axes instead of one by one. And the seventh house can also be any kind of contractual relationship. Like that's why marriage is here, because it's like a legally binding agreement. But also if you had a business partner, that could go here. And so sometimes relationships broadly will go here too. Like not everyone gets married, but generally I would say it's more like marriage. So sometimes if you're just dating someone, that person may or may not be represented there if it's not the person you marry. Venus could represent that person. Venus is like relationships more broadly and your impulse to relate. So both Venus and the seventh house can represent things that you might be attracted to, things that for the 7th house in particular, because it's opposite to you, this could be things, especially if you don't have any planets there, things that maybe you don't identify with as much because it's opposite to the place that represents yourself. And so sometimes we're attracted to the things that we don't feel that we have. And you know, opposites attract and all that. So yeah, sometimes the 7th house is things that we're attracted to.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So
Yeah, so you've got a couple planets in the 2nd house. You have Venus in the 2nd house, which is nice. Venus also represents money. So if you have the money planet in the money house, that can mean fortune with finance. Okay, and then,
Ask a quick question?
yeah.
I just don't see this symbol anywhere.
We're not going to focus on the outer planets as much. They are more like cultural and less personal. They take, like, Uranus takes 8 years to get through a sign. Neptune, I think, takes like 10 or so. Pluto takes like 20. And so it's not stuff as personal to you. So we just won't focus on that as much, but you totally can. And especially if it's right on top of a personal planet, that's more significant. But anyway, okay, so I talked about the 1st and 7th house. So then the 2nd house I said was money. Across from the 2nd house is the 8th house. So the 8th house has to do with other people's money. So the 2nd house is like your money. The 8th house, opposite to the 2nd house, other people's money. So if you had debt or if you had inheritance, that would go over there. Or the 8th house also has to do with death, which is kind of in alignment with inheritance. So like if someone in your life dies and you inherit money, that's like other people's money in a sense. The 8th house can also be associated with spirituality and transformation. So sometimes people who have placements in the 8th house, these can be people who might have more kind of, I don't want to say paranormal experiences, but maybe like if you had Mercury in the 8th house, that could be indicating like the ability. Mercury is like communication and speech. So Mercury can be like the part of life that you speak to. So if you had Mercury in the 8th house, like you might speak to spirits. That's kind of one way to interpret that. The 8th house, the 2nd house, the 12th house, and the 6th house, these are all dark houses. So 4 of the houses are like dark because they don't aspect the ascendant. In an aspect, again, is just a significant angular distance. So the 1st house cannot see or relate to house 2, 12, 6, or 8. And because there's no aspect, there's no relationship that's formed between the house that represents the self and these places, those are more challenging parts of life generally. So the 8th house can be a tricky one. But if you have a very positive planet, like Jupiter or Venus in a dark house, then that might indicate gifts or like healing gifts within that area of life. So for instance, if you had Venus in the 8th house, maybe you might be like a death doula or something, someone who's able to really help facilitate these types of experiences and transformations.
So which ones are the dark houses?
2, 12, 8, and 6.
Okay.
Yeah. And okay, so then we had the 3rd house. This also has to do with siblings, your aunts and uncles, kind of like family broadly who are not your parents, cousins, sisters, broader family stuff. The 3rd house is also your community, your neighborhood. I think housemates also go here if you have housemates. Just like broader kind of community people, neighborhood bars would go here. And like I mentioned, communication, writing, publishing, also divination, also road trips, car stuff goes here. There's a lot of stuff in the 3rd house. So sometimes if you have prominent 3rd house places, like cars can be more important to you, or you might have more of an interest in that, or like road trips or something like that. And then across from the 3rd house is the 9th house. So 3rd house is the goddess, and 9th house is God. So like I was saying, the 3rd house is like elementary school, middle school, high school. The 9th house has to do with like university. And so where the 3rd house is kind of local community stuff, the 9th house has to do with like broader cultural institutions. So the justice system, like broader educational systems, also the medical system, also like the legal system. So these big cultural things. Oh, religious institutions. Religion also goes in the 9th house. In traditional astrology, this is also where this house was associated with authority. There was also kind of like a kingliness or a regalness here. The sun has his joy in the ninth house. The sun also is the archetype of the king. And because in ancient times, there was no difference between being the head of a religious group and the head of the country. Like, they were kind of one and the same. If you were king, you had the divine right to kingship, right? That's kind of how that was conceptualized. Okay, and then the fourth house. The fourth house has to do with parents and also your homeland, like you're literally where you're from. Also the physical house that you live in. Could also have to do with assets relating to property, like if you own property or houses or things like that. Can also have to do with death sometimes as well. The fourth house is usually where the IC is. The IC represents parents and also ancestry. So sometimes grandparents can go in the fourth house too, whereas the third house is like cousins and siblings and like broader family. The fourth house is like parents and grandparents and that more like lineage and ancestry. Yeah, and it's the most hidden or private part of life because it's at the bottom of the chart. It's the most distant from what is visible. So sometimes like more secret or hidden parts of life can be here. So if you had like a very prominent placement like your sun in the fourth house or something, you might be a little bit more introverted. You might be a little bit more private. You might not really want to just explode who you are into the world as much. You might like to be at home or something. That could be one way to interpret something like that. And then across from the fourth house is the 10th house. And the 10th house has to do with career and also public reputation and vocation. And so the 10th house, this is not like work, like I have a job at a coffee shop. This is the work that I'm meant to contribute to the world. And sometimes that's what you do for money, and sometimes it's not. The 10th house is really like at the end of your life, like what were you known for? What did you contribute? What did you do? And again, that could be your job or it might not be. It depends on the person. And so, yeah, this is also how people see you. Again, the 10th house is normally where the MC is, which also represents career. And so this is the most visible part of the sky. This is how people see you. Planets in the 10th house, this could relate to what you do for work, how you are at work, how you show up, or also how people see you, like what your reputation is, the way people think of you. And how planets in the 10th house and the first house, these are the most powerful or like angular houses. So the angles, the MC, the IC, the ascendant, the descendant, all of those are particularly energetic. And the house topics in those places tend to be the most significant. Ascendant, self, descendant, marriage, fourth house, parents, 10th house, career. So if you have a planet in those houses or on those angles, that just gives those planets kind of more energy and power and are probably things that you have more drive towards or something like that. Yeah. And then we have the 5th house, which is going to be related. This is called the house of good fortune. This has to do with creativity. Also children. If you have children, they would go there. Also, if you were asking about like fertility things, you would analyze the 5th house. This is also the place of pleasure and sex and parties and fun and play and games and hobbies and all of the things you do for joy and fun in your life. That type of stuff all goes in the 5th house. And across from the 5th house is the place of good spirit. So the place of good fortune and then the place of good spirit. These are kind of the more fun houses. So the 11th house has to do with friendship and hopes and dreams and groups and alliances. So the 11th house, like if you were a part of any networks or groups or organizations, that would go here. I also find that bands tend to go here if you're in a band, like examples of friends that come together in a group in order to do something meaningful together. You know, it's like you get together and make your dreams come true. That's like the 11th house stuff. Yeah, it's like your grand visions and dreams and things like that, and the people who help you actualize them. And then the next last axis is another challenging one. So the 6th house is called the place of bad fortune. This has to do with injuries, accidents, physical health, and this is the house of work. Like, this is the work that you have to do. In ancient times, it was associated with slavery or forced labor. Modern times, it's associated with your employees or people who work under you, your subordinates. So if you have employees, like the way that your relationships with them might be reflected in the 6th house. The 6th house also, again, is physical health. So if you were looking at transits for your health, you would probably look at the 6th house. And accidents, car accidents, injuries, yeah, anything like that. Kind of relating to the physical body more so usually. And then the 12th house opposite to that is the place of bad spirit. So this, in ancient times, would be literally associated with, like, you know, demons, like bad spirits. And in modern times is associated more with mental health. So it has to do with also places of isolation. So for instance, prisons or asylums, or also on a positive side, like retreat centers. So if you have prominent places in the or placements in the 12th house, like being alone might be more important to you, or having like time alone and your ability to be secluded. The 12th house can also have to do with kind of spirituality and transformation. Another one of those kind of like witchy, otherworldly, speaking to spirits, if you have Mercury here type of stuff, or if you have like the sun or the moon or something, could be something like that. Also has to do with enemies. If you've ever had any enemies, which, you know, in modern times you might think of like people who have bullied you, or like if you have like people who are actually kind of after you, which I know enemies sounds kind of like dramatic and like, does anyone really have enemies? But yes, people do. Like, people literally do have enemies. And even if you don't conceptualize them that way, this can be people who like actually wish ill of you. Like, that's a real thing that happens to people sometimes. That's something that can go here. Also, yeah, death sometimes. Yeah. So those are kind of the basic significations. I already talked to you about the good and bad houses, angular houses. So there are also like houses that are particularly favorable for certain planets. Like I already told you, the sun has its joy in the 9th house. The moon has her joy in the 3rd house. So if the planet has its joy in that house, it's just basically a condition of bonification. It's just like a thumbs up for that planet. It's in a house that it really likes to be in. If a house is in its domicile, that's also very strong for that planet. Like if Venus is in the sign of her rulership, Libra or Taurus, that's like a strength point for Venus. There's also places that are particularly challenging for planets. If a planet is opposite to its place of rulership, that's going to be really hard. For instance, Venus has her fall in in Scorpio and Aries, and its detriment in Virgo, I think. Anyway, I'd have to make sure I got that right. But that's probably beyond the scope of this class. But just know that you can really kind of analyze how fortunate or unfortunate a given planet is. The planetary joys is one way to look at that. Mercury rejoices in the 1st house. Saturn rejoices in the 12th house. Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house. Mars rejoices in the 6th house. And Venus rejoices in the 5th house, which all of that is in this little thing. I don't know if it's very easy for you to read, but there's little planet symbols in some of the houses, and those are the places where that planet rejoices. Over there, and over there, and over there. Can you see that in your slides? Is that legible? Okay, cool. So that was my rapid speed delineation of all that. And then I listed out a bunch of interpretive principles, and this is what we're going to look at for you guys. So I want to go through each of these and have you identify for yourself in your birth chart now which house. Well, I guess first of all, we should figure out if you have a day or a night chart, and this is whether or not you were born during the day or night. And the way that we do this is, remember, the ascendant is the eastern horizon and the descendant is the western horizon. So if the sun is above the horizon, that's a day chart. If the sun is below the horizon, that's a night chart. So this sun right here is just barely above the ascendant. So this is a day chart. So go through and figure out if you have a day or a night chart, and let me know if anybody struggles with that. If you're like, what are you talking about? I can come help you. Yep, so you guys are both born around sunset then, if you are both have the sun close to the descendant. But if it's above the horizon, still the day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, if it's just below the horizon, sometimes there's like, you could get into a debate about it. If it's still like bright outside, you know, sometimes the sun sets, but it still looks like daylight. So you could kind of make an argument. But anyway, now that you have figured out whether or not you have a day or a night chart, if you have a day chart, figure out what house your sun is in. If you have a night chart, figure out what house your moon is in. Sometimes people identify more with the sun sign if they're born during the day, and sometimes they identify with the moon sign if they're born during the night. And so this is the house where you probably shine, where you probably feel comfortable being yourself in this part of life. Is this making sense? Is everyone figuring it out?
What are the R's?
Oh, that's retrograde. Moving backwards in the sky. Everyone figure that out? Or cool? And let me know if you have questions. I'm gonna like move through it, but if you're like, I can't figure this out because this is my first time looking at a birth chart, then like, let me know, I can help you. Okay, so the next thing that I wanna interpret with you guys, so Jupiter, if you're born during the day, right now you know if you're born during the day, Jupiter is the most positive planet for day charts. Venus is the most positive planet for night charts. So generally, if you have a day chart, figure out what house Jupiter is in. If you have a night chart, figure out what house Venus is in. This is going to be the house topic that might be kind of the most fortunate, blessed part of life for you. This is where the planets are giving you blessings. And you could look at both if you want, but generally Jupiter is the most positive for day and Venus the most positive for night. And this doesn't always work out one-to-one, right? This is kind of the most basic, bare bones, like simplest way to do this. Like, it's going to depend on the aspects and whatever else is going on there. So sometimes you might not resonate with it, but generally this is how it goes. Everybody figure that out? Should I keep going? Okay, cool. Let me know if you struggle. And then the most difficult planets, if you're born during the day, is Mars. Most difficult planet, if you're born at night, is going to be Saturn. So if you have a day chart, look for Mars. If you have a night chart, look for Saturn. Those are going to be the house topics that are probably the most difficult for you. And I find that Saturn is always going to be a hard time no matter what. Saturn can be especially like core wounding type of like childhood trauma type of stuff. And then Mars can sometimes be more like, I have a lot of anger here. Like, I am mad at this part of life. But it, you know, that's just my 2 cents. Traditionally, they would say Mars for day charts, Saturn for night charts, the most difficult planets.
Where my hopes and dreams are.
Oh!
That's not good though, right?
Well, it depends. It could mean you have a lot of energy there as well. Mars can be also just a lot of drive and energy and action. Planet of war. Okay, then Mercury. You can figure out where Mercury is no matter what time of day you're born. I find Mercury is the part of life that you can kind of like speak to. Like Mercury is our planet of communication. Like you can really speak on this, speak to this. Like maybe if you have Mercury in the 7th, you can really articulate like relational dynamics or marriage dynamics. If you have Mercury in the 6th, maybe you can really speak to physical bodies and to health or to animals. Also the 6th house can do with animals sometimes too. If you have Mercury in, I don't know, the 2nd house, maybe you can really speak money. You know how to work finances or something like that. That's an example of an interpretive principle there. Oh, but the most important thing that I probably should have started with, the ruler of your ascendant. So the ascendant is who you are. The ruler of the ascendant, this is also kind of who you are. So if and to figure out the ruler of your ascendant, what you would do is, you know your rising sign? Everyone has their rising sign. So you find your rising sign in this fun diagram here. And then you figure out which planet is there. So for instance, for Libra, you see Venus is here. So Venus rules Libra. So Venus is the ruler of your ascendant. So figure out which planet rules your ascendant in this little zodiac wheel here. Figure out your ascendant, figure out which planet rules it. Then find that planet in your birth chart, and that will point towards what could be the general purpose or life direction for you. An area of the house topics there generally tend to be areas of focus, purpose, life direction. And especially if there are other planets on top of that planet, if there's multiple things really close by on top of your ruler of the ascendant, those will also be probably very focal things for you to integrate, focus on, major purpose, life direction stuff. That's as far as like self-understanding and psychological development. I think really understanding your rising sign and also the ruler of your ascendant. Like I would suggest you all go on YouTube and look up whatever that is, if it's, Mars and Scorpio, or if it's like Venus and Libra or whatever it is for you, to like really understand what that planet means, because that's going to be who you are in a pretty serious way. And then the house placement is kind of what the major focus is for you, probably. And similarly, we could look at the ruler of your 10th house to see what your career is about and what maybe the major focus of your work might be. So in the same way, you figure out what is the zodiac sign that my 10th house is, and then you find what is the ruler of that sign. Then you see where is that located in my birth chart, what are the house topics associated with that, and that could be kind of a major thing for your career and vocation. And similarly, if there's other planets right on top of it, that's how we kind of get into the interpretation there. And then one more thing, I guess, interpretive principle-wise. So everyone has every zodiac sign present in their birth chart, right? So even though you might be Libra, Sun, Moon, Rising, like you still have all of these other zodiac signs present. So you can also think of like my 11th house sign is kind of like how I am with my friends. My 4th house sign is kind of how I am with my parents. And kind of look at the different zodiac signs with those different areas of life to be like, this is how I am in different parts of my life. Because we're not the same way in all circumstances, right? You might act a little bit differently at work than you do at home. And that's one way you can kind of look at that with astrology. Okay, I gave you so much information. Who's ready to talk about their birth chart? Yes?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out here for like my 10th house.
Let's look at your 10th house. Do you want me to pull it up on here?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it.